Hello, hello. This is Chris. I'm with my friends and brothers and the One Great Work Warriors. We're out here for another great chat today to help folks, listeners, to grapple with the concepts of freedom, truth, morality, and importantly, natural law. And the more we have these discussions and grapple with these difficult topics, the better we become at discussing them. And the more hope there is of other people watching, listening, and thinking about the importance of philosophy and working towards a better world. So thanks, Rick, Derek, Brandon, Jerry, and Jim for joining me today for this conversation. Today, the question came up: what is the ego and how does it relate to our great work? So we're going to approach this topic today in just a kind of free-form style. Just jump around, whoever's got something to say. I'm going to kick it off a little bit by I found a quick little definition online about psychoanalysis, which is, I guess it mostly derives from Freud, a famous guy in history, thinker. But psychoanalysis is the part of the mind that mediates between the conscious and the unconscious and is responsible for reality testing and a sense of personal identity. So to me, this gives a pretty good kind of idea for what we're talking about when we're talking about the ego is our sense of ourself and what we're the bridge between the consciousness and the unconsciousness. So I'll pass it on to maybe Derek, and you can help me. Let's start off by with sort of the grammar around what is the ego. What are we talking about here? What's the question?
What are we talking about? We're talking about the I am, part of that isness that is part of one's individual business, I suppose. We all, self-actualized at one point in, our soul journey from whatever dimension, realm, all that stuff. And people want to say we just reincarnated one time here, whatever, all that aside, there's that Latin terminology. We can go back to those things, but yeah, we're just gonna kind of go across the table. And for me, it's like throughout the truth-seeking journey, you're gonna go through these rites of passage of learning through so many people. It's eclectic out there, right? There's so much stuff in internet land, and like the New Age movement is one of those thresholds, if you will, to get beyond. Mark Passio calls it like the cul-de-sac,
Mm.
before like the true spirituality or whatever, right? Funny, cul-de-sac in French means the ass of the bag, by the way. Just so people know, like, I speak French, but for me, just real quick, it's just like we're really gonna hammer home what really is the ego, not what it isn't. And this new age notion of, oh, it's just like this. There's a difference between like, who you are with that will force as opposed to like the shadow ego that's kind of running the scenes, subconsciously, unconsciously, and all that jazz, So yeah, I'm gonna keep it short and sweet. On to the next, brother man. What's cracking?
I'll go ahead and jump in right here with this conversation. So the ego, let's keep it basic, and you should always be understanding the etymology of words. So when we are talking about the ego, at its etymological standpoint, it just means the self. How the I. It is that ego in the Latin language which was the I. It is the self that thinks, the self that feels, how the self that experiences, the self that how emotes. It is that part how of you that is the individual. It's always seeing reality, scaled down into the version of I, the self, me, my. It is not good. It is not bad. It is a part of us that is necessary. It is a part of us that we need in order to develop, to survive, to evolve. So we have to understand that the ego is a part of our personality. It is a part of ourself. It is not something that should be ran away from. It is not something that should be put on a pedestal. It is just something that needs to be understood and incorporated and pretty much wielded in the correct way. I'll pass it on to Rick.
I agree with what you guys are saying. It's a tough one. It's a tough topic. I was saying that before we started recording, that over the last probably week I've talked to my wife, I've talked to a lot of my friends about just the topic of ego. And it's definitely, I wonder, like, when when you think about ego, I know that a lot of people take that as a negative. In a lot of ways it's been portrayed that, people are that have a big ego, but I also wonder, like, is ego, like, do we need ego? Because that's where the divide is, and I'm trying to word it the best I can. But when I think of ego, I think, it where like I'm trying to think of where it becomes a problem, because I think when people have, like, when I think of ego is confidence in what comes to me, and then that's a good thing, because if you are confident and you believe in yourself and you and what you're doing, and can that come off as ego? And I think the problem is that maybe when people start identifying with their job or a belief system or what it may be, is maybe when the ego kind of runs amok. If you guys know what I'm trying to say, like, I'm trying to word it the best I can, but it kind of seems where the conversation always goes when I talk to people about it, is that ego and then confidence. And I think that, you do need an ego to move forward. I think in a lot of when in your abilities, you got to have that confidence in yourself and what you're doing and all of the things that go along with that. So I like to, like, what do you think? That's kind of where the conversation seems to go when I talk to people, is we kind of get going back and forth between ego and then having a confidence, and if that's healthy and when it becomes unhealthy.
Well, they don't see the ego as almost like a like a two-sided coin, or like a tool that can be wielded in multiple ways. You can be
Hmm.
have molded in or wielded in a positive way, or it can be molded and wielded in a childlike, ignorant way. And that's the
Right.
thing is, a lot of people only see it through their perception as the ego is bad, because they are seeing this form of ego being displayed and latched on to certain cult identities, certain religious forms of thought, certain programming, and of course we have the whole order followings, cult that's going. So people are used to that negative form of attachment with the ego, and a
Right.
lot of people don't really see it in that more positive form, as in the ego has to be worked with. It has to be something that has to be cared for, has to be something that is nurtured and developed, because if not, then that part of you is almost, in a sense, kind of dealing with like that child aspect, in of a sense. So
Hmm.
if if that part doesn't get cared for and nurtured for, then what's going to be that overall sense in the form of, as you develop, but your ego does not. And that's what we are seeing, is because
Right.
people have gone through that physical, health development. They are lacking the psychological, spiritual, and possibly that emotional, health development, because a lot of people's egos are rooted in their emotional attachments too.
Mm. And something that I would say has to be kept in check a lot of the times too. Like, you got to check in a lot, so it doesn't become running, like, it doesn't start running amok and kind of taking control over everything else.
Yep.
Yeah, I find that it's something that people aren't even aware of. Like, we weren't taught it in school. I don't remember really learning about the ego
Mm.
in school, except for maybe, like Chris had mentioned, Freud. That's like the only time it came up, and it wasn't really like made a big deal about. And it's definitely, I think most people identify with it. Like, that's who they think they are,
Right.
and they can live their whole life without even considering that, that they're not their mind. Um, so I mean, I'll take it to like that power of now. That's where, see, only 10 years ago is where I had worked with a life coach, and he started talking about this stuff. So most of my life, I never like knew what the ego was. And so I started reading that book, The Power of Now, and they're talking about stuff like you're not your mind. And so I think most people identify with their thoughts and they think that's who they are. And the power of now brings up, well, what about if you're the one who's listening to the to those thoughts? You're not the one, like, it's not you.
Producing.
You're the one listening. And then once I like got my head around that, and that took like that like was a mind fuck, like literally. And I
Hmm.
couldn't understand that for a while. Maybe even a year. Like it's just I had to keep reading that book over and over. And but once I got it, it was like a whole new discovery of like I started asking myself, who am I? And it was like amazing, like to think. I think most people probably can live their whole life not asking that. Not you hear more of this in the new age movement, like connecting with your true self, your higher self. And I'm starting to find like that's definitely, and that's part of meditation. So when you meditate, you start to connect with who you really are, and you may find that. And I'm still learning, and I'm always going to be learning until the day I die. But the awareness, like that's what changed my life. The awareness, I think if people can get the awareness and like of the ego, that the ego exists, and like you've all said, it's definitely necessary. We need it for to survive.
Yeah.
And um it shows you what you need to work on. Like, it's definitely, it's we need it. It's good, but it fucks you up too. but but
Hmm.
Absolutely.
the awareness, like that's what's changed my life, is like I can catch it. I can go like weeks to being like hijacked by it, and all of a sudden I realize, oh shit, that motherfucker, like that's my ego fucking with me. And then I can kind of like work from there and get to a better space and connect with my true self. And that's just been my experience in the last 10 years of when the subject of the ego was actually brought into my life, whereas up until then I hadn't even considered. I always thought, that saying, I think therefore I am. I thought that's who I was. And there's way more to it.
We
And
all
so
kind of think we're something because we're born into a world conditioned beyond programs on top of programs and all that stuff. But actually, I don't know if you guys ever, read into horoscopes growing up or whatever the hell, but Jerry, I want to get your opinion on this because you and I are both fellow lions, my Leo friend. Is that true? You got that fire in you? But yeah, man. So yeah, we hear, all not all throughout our life, but often like, oh, Leos and and their ego issues, the inflated stuff and all that stuff, or we might be reeking of confidence, this and that, but you, you, you want to chime in on that, Jerry?
Wow, Derek, you just like sparked some memories in my head because I think when I first heard about the ego, it had to do with Eckhart Tolle reading his book, The Power of Now. And same like you just mentioned, like, oh yeah, you're a Leo. Oh, they got big egos. So I feel you with that fire, man. Like I was telling Brandon on his show that I'm like a lazy Leo in a way, which isn't good, but I'm admitting to it. But or I mean like the laid back Leo, I'll say that. But doing like from one moment to the next, just like being on camera, like speaking up, like that, like literally gets my energy moving. So I'm gonna shift this conversation back into the ego, as in like how I learned from it, which I think was from reading The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, which I recommend because it blew my mind. I was in a dark place at that time, and then realizing I wasn't my problems. My problem was I was super like focused on myself. Like it's all about me. Like, oh, I don't have the girlfriend I want. I suck at this job. I uh I basically am miserable. But knowing that that's not me, like I'm consciousness, and we're all consciousness, like looking at a plant, like for a minute, you know what I mean? Like you realize that we're all conscious, but we humans, we have a higher level of consciousness. But the ego, as you guys mentioned, it's a good thing because it makes us aware when a branch from a tree falls down, like we know to like move away from it so we don't get so we don't die from that branch hitting us and demolishing us. So yeah, I'll pass it to you, Chris.
Thanks, Jerry. That was eloquent. And like our awareness, our perception, that's our greatest gift in this experience of life, because really the only thing that's real is right now. Right now, as soon as that passes, it's not real anymore. That's the past, right? Like, and if you take something from the past, even if all 6 of us were here when I snapped my fingers, we might all have a slightly different interpretation and memory of what was going on at that moment when I snapped my fingers. And we could all describe it, and we might be close, but we're all going to have slightly different variations on that description. And so, when we form this identity of what we are, it's made up of what we think we are, right? Like, we remember the way that, like, for instance, let me give you an example. Someone who has less confidence, I usually have struggled with confidence over the years. If I was in a room and I raised myself to speak in front of all the people in that room, afterward I leave that room and I think to myself, damn, that was embarrassing. I probably shouldn't have said all the things I said, and I stuck my foot in my mouth. It was embarrassing, right? Like, because I always remember the areas I could have done better, and so my tendency with my ego for many years was to remember things from the past and then take those things and kind of, like, you smash them together like in this ugly clay picture of yourself, and you're like, that's what I'm like. When I get in crowds, I say embarrassing things and I embarrass myself. That's who I am. That's what I am. And so I think most people are in the habit of doing this kind of a really messy procedure in their mind of extrapolating what you are based on past things that you've heard people say and your own shitty memories of things you could have done better. and that's why we think of ego when you hear the word ego problem. That's the first thing that comes into your head, right? Because people always say, oh, that guy has an ego problem. And so I think it's common from Hollywood and school and religious and all these normal ways of authoritarian indoctrination for us to consider ego as a negative thing. It has a negative connotation because we remember this picture that's been drawn of us, this shitty picture of the past. And it's not just us, it's things other people have said that we then extrapolate from, and we're like, oh, that guy said I'm lazy or whatever. And then we're like, oh, I guess I'm a little bit lazy, right? Like, we start to form this sort of opinion of ourselves, but it's a really crappy picture. And it doesn't really describe what we really truly are, which is what Jim and Jerry are speaking to from The Power of Now, is that you're only awareness, conscious perception, and divine intelligence in this moment. And that's only if you're aware of this moment and paying attention to it. If your mind's in the past, you're that much less real, and what you are is, it's diminished in the moment. So yeah, I mean, does that spark any ideas? Anyone want to jump in on that?
Yeah, just real quick, I want to kind of touch upon because you brought up, and like how Rick had brought up how the ego gets talked about in a negative connotation. Well, if you look at what it is, as far as what it means, as far as the self that thinks, the self that wills, the self that hell emotes. One of the things that the ego also does is it tries to create justifications. So I think that's one of how the ways that the ego, I'm sorry, how that the ego has been seen in a negative, how connotation is because we see people doing the wrong behaviors. We see people doing these immoral, how behaviors, and it is that ego that wants to try to justify their behaviors because how the ego is that part of ourselves that tries to I guess you could say, break down and interpret reality for our own self in a sense. So therefore, once that deconstruction happens and things aren't going according to plan, the ego comes in to create the self-defense mechanism to kind of keep things, going. Almost kind of like the way how the government does when shit starts fucking up, and they come in and they never take responsibility. It's just, like, how can we continue to go, 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 go? So hell, in this justification sequence, how the ego would just feeding hell itself into this loop, to the fact, and that's why it stays into that negative, kind of connotation, is because it is that means of creating, justifications, no matter what the facts say, no matter what the truth says, no matter what the objective reality says. And then that's what leads us into like negative forms of more relativistic thinking, and forms of solipsism too.
True.
Mm.
And yeah, so all these negative connotations of people not being able to keep their egos in check for whatever reason, and I mentioned, the whole shadow ego aspect will, fall in line with shadow work much, and all these traumas that have not been, addressed and healed, and even revealed sometimes. Yeah, the subconscious, unconscious is running the show. That's what I meant in the beginning. And what that does, the shadow ego is going to create these, ego attachments, if you will, and create this false identity of this person. So they're going to be creating these negative feedback loops all their life, and being identifying with, some kind of victimhood or trauma or that kind of stuff, creating those justifications to make a right to use juris, ficare, I think. But real quick, I don't know if you guys ever heard any kind of symbolism or analogy regarding how the ego could be described as, like a metaphor of, it's like your dragon, and that inner dragon within you, that fire, you have to tend those fires, right? Which is why, the ego might run amok if you're not keeping that shit in check and tending those fires, and being able to conquer your dragon, that fucking, wild beast of a fucking will force. Once you get that shit proper, controlled, and done the alchemical process of, burning those false identity attachments and who you think you were, whatever, and who other people thought you were. Once you master that and master fucking self, all that projection from the exterior isn't really gonna fuck with you that much, because you like really made a holistic version of yourself, and your proper ego is shining through on that, and that is your will force saying like, no, like, this is who I am, and you're like being firm and confident of that. And people want to mistake that for arrogance, like a lot of, Leo stuff, right, Jay? But
Yeah,
anyways, I don't know if you
arrogance,
guys heard
right?
about dragons like that, but I find it cool. And like, you think about that when you watch some of those movies sometimes. I don't know, like, I caught a
Yeah.
couple of things like, oh yeah, but
It's
anyways.
like taming the dragon, kind of your
Yeah.
dragon. And then when like arrogance, that's a great one too, Derek. That you just brought that up. That's a great way to describe it, what I was trying to say, because I know you can use ego for a positive thing. And it's not a negative. I'm glad that we're saying that it's not negative, because I look at successful people, like people at the top of their game, whether they're musicians, they're actors, they're athletes. They have to have an ego. I mean, I think that and I want your guys' opinion on that, because I could be wrong. I'm really trying to define it myself, but I really think that that's a healthy ego, because it helps you excel and reach new heights and really strive. And you have that ego, and that's why I was saying confidence at the beginning, how maybe that's people mix that up with ego, confidence, and
I
kind of
mean,
that thing.
have you heard when people put those two terms together, ego identification,
Right.
as what coming to my mind, like, in some of the books I've read, some of the self-help type books, they describe, the importance of using your identity. The things you identify with are things that you do. Like, say, if you think of yourself as really athletic,
Mhm.
like, let's say I was a star on television, right? And I'm starring in roles where I'm like a hero. Like, I'm definitely going to want to be built well physically. I'm going to identify with that hero male who's big and strong,
Right. Yep.
And so the trick of it is that in our slave culture, in our modern indoctrinated, authoritarian, external authority riddled world, people are very used to externalizing this concept as well. So like if I'm a football star, I might buy myself a big giant Ram truck and put like my football logo all down the side, right? I'm going to identify with that. And I'm actually going to probably like broadcast like a spotlight my personal ego onto my truck, and it's part of who I am. And then when that truck gets wrecked, I'm really mad and upset, because I actually see that thing as part of the advertisement for what I am as this tough guy, right?
Yep.
And that's where we see what we're talking about is the false ego that people create. And our society is all about that. That's where most people live. It's like I said, it's a storyline based on what other people have said, or what colors and flashy clothes and jobs and careers we have, and what things we produce in the world. I have hanging on my wall here my certificate of knowledge. I attended super bullshit school with higher knowledge than you, therefore I identify, and that's part of my ego now. I've built this construct of things from the past, basically, like I'm saying, or things from the future I'm going to excel at. I'm going to the Olympics, and so we're addicted, almost like a bad addiction to this false ego, this false idea of false identification, false ego identification, rather than what it really is at its purest sense. Is the definition I described in the beginning, is a moment by moment reality testing. How do I react in this moment? How do I react in this moment? Now that I've thought about things and considered all these things, how do I react in this moment? We're constantly retesting and retesting. That's what reality is giving us. It's giving us a feedback for how we're doing. And if we're conscious, and if we're looking inwardly at ourselves and noticing, oh, I get really pissed off when this and that happens. Why do I get so pissed off? If we're asking those type of questions, we're really trying to get to that deeper core of what our ego is on the inside. But our society and our culture and way most people think of the word ego is going to be always external based. It's all backwards.
Yeah.
Great point. Yep.
Titles and labels. If you look at, what Chris just talked about and what Rick just talked about, how people love these titles, people love these labels to go and, brag about. That's what feeds the ego. But when you look at pretty much on how like a feudalistic society, how it was operating, it was always the ones with the titles who had the biggest egos and had the land. So it's kind of like another form of mind control and indoctrination, is they took these kind of like royal titles, then like, then he'll give us all these other forms of ridiculous man-made titles that people think have some form of validity. People think because they've gone to, Caesar school and gotten some piece of paper stamped by Caesar saying that they have this title, that they get this kind of power and authority, and that's what feeds their egos. This whole freaking idea of labels and titles. Just
Then
mind control.
when the egos are fed, a lot of these people are narcissists, and it's like feeding a black hole. They can never get enough. And a narcissist to kind of like take it to like the vampiristic type of thing, it's attention whores or that kind of stuff. Like this like dark shadow ego shit. And something about bloodsuckers, parasites, rather vampires, is they have a tough time seeing the reflection in the mirror whatsoever, right? So with these people, it's really hard for them to realize anything themselves, let alone hear it from other people, because like you said, Bryn, I think, all these self-defense mechanisms and all that, you know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that the ego, you guys let me know what you think. Like it's equal across the board, but it gets more spoken about or noticeable when you speak of like confident people, or like people in power, and they have the big egos. But I think it's just as present for everyone else. The people who submit to the people in power, like their egos are telling us that we're less than them. Like that's how it seems to me. Like we all have the ego, but it's not just like big ego means confident. Like big ego could mean I feel like I'm a piece of shit. Like it just doesn't come across as that, but your ego's dominating you. Like their big ego is dominating, and like they have the big flashy truck and they think they're fucking awesome or something. But I think it's just as much ego if you think you're a piece of shit. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Like
Is that what the
you're
ego
lost.
is?
Well, who was it that was saying like, no, that was you,
Like
Jim, that was
actually.
saying earlier in life, all your thoughts were like very egoic, right? Like they were based on like, oh, am I going to get laid, or am I going to get this car, or it's always like personal satisfaction, right? But like what we're describing as the more positive connotation of that word could be like being in the moment, like you guys were saying, Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. And actually, like I was doing with the snap, being in the moment you're in is fully embracing, like reality. But I think you're right in that you can go one way or the other. You could either spend all your time concentrating on this ego, which I always remember this one guy. I was in a train station on a trip when I was visiting Washington D.C. and there's like a glass of a where they're selling stuff, and seriously, this guy's standing there and he's just like looking at himself. He's flexing different ways, and there's people all around. There's crowds of people around, and this guy's just like posing to himself only, and
Right.
that's what it's like being in this world of all this shit going on, and you're just totally focused on your own self. And you could be focused in the way of noticing, oh, I'm so big and buffed and my truck's so much bigger than yours, or oh, I always screw everything up and I'm always the problem. And I've been around people like that where it's actually hard to hang out with them because they are so focused on their own negative attributes that's like they can't even stop doing that to kind of like listen to you for a minute, and that's just as bad. I think you're right.
Good point. Yeah.
That's their
Yeah, real quick,
identity.
it's like the opposite polarity. Jim, spot on. That was really cool. And it's like you can embrace, loving yourself to death, in a toxic way, or embrace, thinking you're a piece of shit in a toxic way. Yeah, Rick, that's all I wanted to say.
It's all
Good
about
stuff.
identity.
Yeah. That was a great point.
Yeah, Chris, you mentioned the ego identification or even the false ego identification, which is new to me. So, yeah, I would love to hear more about that. Yeah.
Well, they what was it? Freud's whole thing was that he said, according to his psychoanalytic theory, there's the id, which is like your primitive drives. That would be like your deepest desires or whatever. And then your
Yep.
superego, which is supposed to be like the more ethical, the part of your mind that's making choices and judgments and stuff. And then your ego is like the whole thing, right? Well, when we're talking about it in theory, in philosophy, the word would mean, like I'm saying, the awareness or the perception of the self. But that's not the way the word's being used in modern conversation. And when people are talking about it on TV, they're using the word to mean what I'm saying, ego identification, which is totally external. And I hear what you're saying, Jim, about like you're focused too much on yourself. That can be a problem too. But what I'm saying is awareness and perception is the gift we have of life, to be able to perceive reality in any given moment. But when you spend your time thinking about what you are going to be to other people or what you were in the past, you're not really in that divine gift of the moment. You're writing a story, then it's never going to be real. It's never going to be in alignment with reality. So you're identifying with something that is outside of yourself. I don't know. Does that make any sense, or am I just going around in circles?
No,
No,
I get it.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're making sense because what he's trying to say is a lot of people put more emphasis on whatever role or identity that give in society, then therefore, because they have that identity or that role, then somehow they get some form of status. So they identify, they egoically identify with that role or held that label to the point to where it literally becomes their full being, to where they forget about her morality, how they forget about truth, how they forget about like any form of knowledge, and they'll just get stuck in that role and they'll play out that role as if it is their full totality, their whole spirit. So just imagine a cop, a order follower, who is so in an ego identification with his badge and his gun that he would be willing to go out there and trample on someone's rights, freedom, beat them, and throw them in a cage. And then we'll still create some form of justification. That's what he's trying to, say as the form of, external egoically identifying, because you take on that identity of that particular role. It's like you going in character for for film, and you are in character 24/7. That's
You,
really
Yep. Great
you
point.
reminded me, Brandon, of a good little story that I think describes that well. Jerry, I know you've met Mike from Autonomy. Mike told me this story because he was in the military, and I think it was Vietnam. I don't remember what war it was, but the story goes basically there's two helicopters, and in the one helicopter they got the machine gun hanging out of the helicopter, and they're just like the guy who's running this machine gun, he's just gunning down people, um, just regular people in the village. And the guy in the other helicopter, he takes his helicopter and he puts it in the way of the villagers, and basically to defy the other helicopter and say, no, you can't shoot down innocent people. So in his head, that helicopter that decided to defend people, he could have said, I'm a soldier. And that would have been like the ego identification with the label that like Brandon's describing. He's like, I'm a soldier. I do what I'm told. I'm not told to go defend villagers. I'm told to fly my helicopter in a northeast direction at 60 knots or whatever. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever he made that conscious decision, is like, I don't give a shit what they're telling me to do. I got the controls of this helicopter right now in this moment, and I'm conscious, aware individual, and I recognize that there's people dying that are innocent. I have to do the right thing. He gets rid of the false ego identification, which is I'm a soldier, I do what I told, I don't want to get in trouble, right? But if you're conscious in the moment and aware, you realize, nope, I got to do what's right. To hell with my job or the clothes I'm wearing or what I identify with. I'm just going to do what needs to be done.
yeah.
Does that describe it?
Yeah.
Because
I
whenever
get it.
that happens, you lose sight of your conscience. You lose sight of free will. You lose sight of morality when you get stuck in that egoic identification. You know.
Yep. And what I think is really cool too, Chris, is as you're talking, I'm thinking about a lot of things right now, but I think about how people that haven't done the work on themselves are taking the time to really get to know themselves. I can see how they kind of get stuck in this ego identification loop too, because if you're not in touch with your true self, you can really quickly fall into just seeking out things that feed your ego. So you're living that ego identification, whether it's what your job you're doing or pick whatever it is. But then I think you kind of seek out things to back up your ego, and then how you identify, and that's kind of the loop that you get into of filling that false ego, is that you're always you kind of get caught in the loop of just finding things that keep feeding that false ego, and you get kind of stuck in that circle, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think part of what makes it so tricky to discuss is the fact that that word is so often used, almost always, in this sort of negative way. It's almost like we need to create another word to describe that same thing, conscious awareness, that we're describing what can be positive, which is, yeah, I mean, like, I'm really lucky to have the gift of life, and it's super valuable. And if I really recognize that value, I really want to make use of it every moment I can. And how's
Yeah, I
that
think
strike you, Jerry? Did that answer your question at all?
Yes, it did. I think Jim was gonna say something.
Yeah.
oh yeah. Well, we keep kind of repeating it, like how the awareness is, that's the key.
Yeah.
Um, that's definitely the key. And that's a hard place to get to. Um, but like what I was trying to say before was like, because Rick was also saying how like people think of the ego. I think it gets misunderstood, like many words that we come across, right? Like rights and anarchy and like, but it gets put up in this category of big ego, and people automatically think of like this flashy or the flashy person. And what I'm trying to say, it's not just those people. It's everyone has the ego, and without the awareness, like we all need it to like solve problems and stuff, but it also has this part of it that makes you think it's you. And I don't know if I'm making sense, but the I'm just trying to say it's equal across the board. I think how I see it, even if someone who like I said thinks they're less than, that's what's dominating them, their identity. And so it's not just the flashy people where ego is applied to. It's
Right.
everyone. Everyone has
Right.
it. Everyone
Yeah.
Yeah.
has it. So even if
Well,
someone thinks they're not like they don't have a big ego, they probably do, but it's like it's just showing itself in a, a different way. But that's
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say, you know.
And
But
having a
as
big
well,
ego isn't bad, because just because you have a big ego, that doesn't mean that it's a healthy ego. Because you can have a
right.
big ego and it be 100% completely healthy. Then you have a big ego and it can be, just straight childlike. It can be very underdeveloped. So yeah, Jim, I get what you're saying. It's just, we have these representations that we create in our mind based on the words that we use. And usually, how when we hear the word big ego, we assume that this is somebody, who's going to be in some kind of like high level corporate job, or a judge, or a lawyer, or a order follower, because most of the times they are. So,
Yeah, real quick. Chris, you made me think of and Jim, and also just approaching people, like people have a cognitive idea of what certain words mean, and it's like for me I got like a mini caveat for these people, kind of like uh, and like if I mention ego or something like that, it's like I gotta be like, all right, this is what I mean about it, so it's not this and that, like da, 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 da. And it's like the same with like anarchy or that kind of stuff, or it's like you try to keep people into like the true definition of things, and I think that will reveal more to them, like the true meaning of it, for them to discover it for themselves within themselves. And like new age notions, yeah, it's like new age, it's such a broad term, but it's like you hear things, and it's like I got love for Terrence McKenna, but it's like how many memes have you seen across the internet of like the ego ain't your amigo,
Mm.
comprende, like that kind of
Yep.
stuff. And it's like, yeah, that's funny and cute and all that, but it's just like, it's like you want it to be your fucking friend, just like you want your shadow to be your fucking friend, and have that integrated to be your true authentic self. That's what I, usually say to people is like, oh, like you got ego issues. Like maybe it's like some shit that I'm not keeping in check. I'm sorry. And I try to correct myself just like every other person, like trying to better themselves here on this
Mhm.
you know, the warrior, one great work, you know, because that's what the fucking one great work is, the one within yourself. That's the great work. You know, how are you conducting yourself on a day-to-day basis? You know, that's basically what it comes down to, being aware, as you guys said, and voila, mes amis, mais oui.
I used to love watching when my kids were little, they going through those processes of learning when they're really small. And when I read reality testing on that description, that really stuck in my head, because I used to joke, like, I remember my one little daughter, we'd sit her at the table and you put something on her little tray where she's eating, right? And she's kind of like already eaten, and now she's just playing with the food. She'd take it and she'd look at you and then she'd drop it, right? And then usually, like, if someone wasn't used to this game, they would pick it up and put it back, and then she'd drop it again. Like, I used to call it gravity testing, you know because, like, when you're a kid, you got to do something like 20, 30 times. You got to check it. You're like, does the same thing happen? Like, because you don't even trust gravity yet. You're just trying to figure things out, right? You're new to this world. Like, if I drop it, is it going to fall every time?
Yeah.
And so you got to try that like 20, 30 times. Like, nah, it falls every time. You're testing it, right? Well, reality is morality. So what we're actually doing in being a self and being an I is we're reality testing day by day. We're saying, if I do this, what comes back? How does it feel? How do people act? Right? And so if you're self-aware, you're able to see, well, how you react to things. And then when you make little adjustments, is that getting better or worse? How's it making me feel? How's it making other people feel? But if you're not able to perceive and be aware of that, like, without a bunch of filters clogging it up of this, what we're talking about, all these false things, right? Like the pictures you have of what people are supposed to be, or what they call themselves, or how you see yourself, the self that you want them to see. If you're using all these filters, your storyline's going to be all difficult for you to comprehend in terms of what's actually happening. The reality testing that you're supposed to be receiving, the output of the situation, the printout, when you read what happened, what your brain figured out, it's going to be all garbled, because you're putting all this information in there that maybe wasn't even real. Like, whether it be looking down on yourself, like I was saying before, oh, I always screw things up, or an ego problem of the other type, where I'm so badass, I never do anything wrong. If you're using these, like, incorrect filters and identifications, you're not really getting a real grasp of reality. You're not finding out the morality of the situation. You're not getting any closer to your true lesson you're supposed to be learning with every moment, which is testing reality and figuring out who you are and what you're supposed to be doing with the next moment that's about to show up.
Bam. Yeah, real quick, and like law correspondence, like everything in awareness outside yourself, but within yourself as well.
Yeah.
I think this is so cool that sorry, go ahead, Brandon.
Well, not Jim, you can go. Hell, I've talked enough.
Hi. I just think this is cool. What we're doing is we're just sitting around talking, like, what makes us operate, trying to understand that. And that's that's the big part of it. Like I said earlier, like, we're not taught about this stuff. And talking about it is, like, so important. And, like, I know, like, say my own mother, if I try to talk to her about this, which I have, she can't comprehend it, and she's gonna go to her grave never understanding what we're talking about right now. And then I have my kids, and I know I bring it up to them, and they're 15, and it's like they think they're like they totally identify with their ego, and like, but like but this emotional intelligence isn't being focused on. So I think it's a big part of raising consciousness, the actual awareness of what the ego is, and how it affects us and makes us do the things that we do. So I work on my kids, that's to take time, but they're gonna have they're gonna get it way before I ever did.
Yeah.
So I feel good about that.
And that's something to bring up too, is in trying to get kids to understand these different aspects about their own self, because kids do have egos too. And if you open up these doors and introduce these things to kids, then maybe when it comes to their own her development, then maybe they won't be as are maybe needing as more work to do, because kids can start to learn these things if you bring it to them, doing how the right ways and the right health environments. So if we could help bring these concepts to kids, which there are some conscious parents who are doing that, then what would it say not only about our health progression, but about their health progression? We introduce this ego to them, and we teach them about it, because like I said earlier, it's going to be tied to your emotional, health programming. So, we don't want our kids to be growing up and having these attachments, these identities, these emotional, health reactions. So how can we incorporate these things into, conscious parenting? I think that's something that more parents should be trying to, help to think about, because we see the effects of this world, so we aren't going to change things overnight, but we can start by, influencing that next generation. So having these talks, trying to encourage them, hey, even though you are going through these changes, there is a part of yourself, because the ego is usually going to want things now, so you have to learn to balance that out. You have to learn to deal with that. And what are you going to do, in certain situations? Because we've all, been in those situations where your ego may want things, it may not want to wait, but you still tell yourself, and you still try to have that, have that super ego, try to use that form of logic and ethical reason. So it's just teaching these concepts, because you're really getting more involved with the higher self, like the higher neocortex. Because if you want to kind of say it how Freud did, he would say that the id is the R complex, that the I'm sorry, that the ego would be the the mammalian brain, how the part with emotions, and then the super ego would be the neocortex, which would like the higher moral, ethical, judgment. So you can kind of put it out: conscious, subconscious, and unconscious. But there's always three. There's always three parts, no matter how you look at it.
I think it helps to notice too that, like, advertising, marketing, people that are trying to sell you things, they're trying to direct towards your unconsciousness, your unconscious mind. And the way they get at that is through your emotions, because most people aren't super conscious and aware, because they're not really in the real ego. They're in the id, like they're in the passion, kind of like I want to get laid tonight, for instance, might be
Yeah.
a young man's, id desire, right? It's the base sexual desire, which is natural. It's not a bad thing. But if you're just completely in that, and that's your focus, and that superego isn't there saying, is that really the right thing to be doing right now? I mean, how many people do we want to have sex in one day? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
evening and balancing things out is that other part of the brain. And then that's what makes up our ego, is the balance in between, being able to mediate those desires. Because like I said, it's not wrong to want to
Right.
have sex, for instance. A male, that's a natural thing. If we didn't do that, we wouldn't have future humans. So, it's not bad, the whole situation. Like, way Freud's looking at, he's breaking it down into pieces and looking at the different jobs of the different parts of ourself. But if you don't think about it at all, and you just go along with what Hollywood's talking about it, when someone talks about ego, you're just going to be, oh yeah, egos are bad, you know? So everything I want's bad. So you're going to feel guilty about everything you want. And you're going to just try to keep that all quiet in the back of your head. And then when the commercial comes up showing a picture of what you want, you're just like, yeah, that's what I want. You're going to go get it. You haven't given any more thought. You don't know where these thoughts are coming from or going to, or where they're going. You just know how you feel. I feel like I want that right now. Feels good. The picture shows it. It shows me happy. I'm going to get it, you know?
Yep.
Yeah, that's why I think self-control is so important, Chris.
Self-control,
Yeah.
self-discipline.
Yep.
I know for
Yeah.
you, Jerry, like you, I'm all really impressed with how good shape you're in. So you must set up your own workout regimen, right? Like, how do you institute that self-discipline? How do you make it happen?
All right, so I pretty much read the what's that book called? Something about habits. You know this one, Chris.
Oh yeah, Atomic Habits.
Atomic Habits. So in
That's a
my
good one.
mind, yeah, I'm just like, look, all I need to do is plan what time of the day, where, and how am I going to do one push-up a day? For example, like you, Chris, like you wake up and then you right away do a push-up, right? Like that's how you start. And then you do that for a long period of time, that becomes a discipline. After 21 days, it becomes a habit. So you automatically start to do this, and that becomes a part of you. So I'll even go and say like that's the super ego right there, because you're building strength. It's good for your mind to be disciplined, and then you just start building up on that. So yeah,
Yeah, like that's
that's
the positive application, right?
yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
thought
and I
Jerry was
think
gonna
that's
show
the
off
way
those
we
guns
want to
for a sec.
use our ego is to go ahead, Brendan. Sorry.
No, I thought Jerry was gonna show off them guns for a sec. I thought he was gonna embarrass us. No,
Yeah,
Jerry,
buddy.
yeah, don't embarrass for all the ladies
Yo,
out there.
hey Chris, I mean, yeah, something to consider. Like, I don't know if you're gonna spill the beans regarding the next funnel conference and all that regarding the trivium stuff, but you know what Brandon mentioned, you know, conscious, subconscious, unconscious. It. I don't know if you wanted to reach out. Is anyone doing a presentation regarding that and trying to tie that into the trivium? I don't know, just like kind of.
Yeah, we're just announcing, June 24th and 25th, the weekend of Funnel. And we're just reaching out to the first presenters. And we don't yet have anyone's titles or exactly what they're presenting yet.
Okay.
But, you know, just the subject is the concept for the whole Funnel conference, which is the trivium. And I think that way of thinking of things in three, I find to be very effective. It's not the only way to think. I mean, you want to think in fours, go ahead. You know, it's like it doesn't have to be that way, but it's very
Quadrivium.
practical.
What?
It makes sense. It makes sense, right? Like you gather all the information, and then you compare that information, you distill that information, and then you get something in the end, and you take that and you look at what you got, and then you got something to share with others, right? And so we could do that same self with our own internal process. And I think that that way that Brandon broke it down really makes sense with our brain, you know, like you got your part of your brain that just wants your base desire, your R complex, right? And then you got your mammalian brain, which is kind of like in touch with what you actually need day to day and reality and logic and all that. And then you got that higher part of your brain that can think about the big picture and how you tie in with everything else in the world, why it actually matters, right? And so if you have the ability to go through those three steps when you're making decisions, then you have you're like an advanced supercomputer compared to like a really low level way of thinking, which is just something comes in, you react based on how you reacted last time, or based on how other people react.
Creatures of habit, man. And we can be habitual in a more higher level spiritual ritual on a daily basis, whether it be, and
Yeah.
that's on the physical, for real, bro. And yeah, Jerry, you inspire me to, you know, pick up the slack on my own inactivities of that kind of, you know, just keeping the body fit. You know, it's like that winter hibernation's got me good, but it's not as cold as where Rick is out in Ontario, but
It's brutal here.
Yeah.
where it was. It's getting better.
So yeah, why don't we do some closing thoughts on the ego, Rick? What do
I
you got? Any takeaways?
I definitely, I think I got a lot to think about. That's for sure. You guys brought up a lot of great things, and I think what's important is to realize that we were saying that, you know, there's a healthy form of ego and there's a negative, there's balance, and I think that's important for people to know. And I kind of think of it's important that we do the work on ourselves and really find out who we truly are and have a healthy ego, because I think a healthy ego could be a great morality compass that can really steer you in a positive and a good way if you're in touch with it and keeping it in check. So that's what I'd like to say.
Jim?
Yeah, I like that healthy ego. Like, because I was describing like the both the polarities of the flashy and the one that thinks they're less than. So to be healthy, that's really what we're looking for. And I'm just like fascinated ever since I found out like that it's not really like you're not your mind, and that discovery of who am I then? And I just was thinking like you guys been talking about the apophatic method, and that's not something that I um really had heard about until recently. And so it just got me thinking what isn't the ego, what the ego isn't. And I mean, a little late in the discussion, but it's just that's something that I'm very interested in. Like, if I'm not the ego, like what isn't the ego? If that makes any sense. Something to think about.
Mhm.
I'll
I want
pass
to
it to
I want to comment on that, but go ahead, pass it
yeah,
to the next person.
Brandon.
What I want people to learn from this one is the etymology of words, because I think once you come from that base premise, or you can start to come from that base premise and understanding where words come from and their origin, it will give you a better understanding. It will give you a better connection with the objective reality, and also with connecting with people. And the reason why this is important is because when you bring up certain words like, hell, the ego, when you bring up certain words like hell, anarchy, freedom, how natural law, people will try to equate those words based on their own views or their own belief structures or their own form of mind control. So, in coming to an understanding of these words, we can come to a better understanding of ourselves, of nature, and reality, and we can do a better job at communicating. So, that's really what I want people to take away from that.
And it's
Pass it to,
very in line with trivium too. Get your
yeah,
grammar.
yep.
Get your grammar. Yep.
I want to pass it to Jared.
All right, guys, I'm just super grateful to be here. It was a blessing to be amongst all of y'all. I think we delivered, well. It was well done. And yeah, I think that's all I have, guys, really. I'll pass it to Chris.
Derek, why don't you close up? Any thoughts, takeaways?
Unmute the mic real quick. Yeah, thank you, Chris. I know you like to do the grand closure as the great granddaddy of this group. Just kidding.
Mhm.
That great
Young
granddaddy
ass
energy.
man over here. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I really appreciate everyone's energy and insights and ideas about it all, and great stuff. And yeah, it was really well rounded around the round table. 6 people split it 2 ways. We got 3 on both sides. Whatever. Not to be all cute. I'm sorry. It's my problem. But yeah, like something that's part of the ego and just like being involved with this whole collective consciousness in everyone that you guys mentioned of Chris, you mentioned of just how people have a slightly different perspective or memory bank or ability in regards to the reality before us in the present moment, or in the past, or even, a couple seconds before, whatever. And yeah, that kind of, it's an interesting thing, just thinking about the, series I'm in with Leslie Powers, not to astray from what we're doing, but yeah, Chris and I, we had a great discussion. I'm going to bring it back to ego stuff with, we had a discussion regarding money and all that stuff, but there's like so many divides within one person's own perception of themselves as well, I think. And so that's something for everyone to consider. And Jim, just like, how many people question and look at themselves in the mirror, like, who am I? Like, really, on the real to real, and like, this stuff. Anyways, we are multidimensional beings beyond words, and like just trying to embody that and align to those codes of consciousness that are universal. Anyways, but yeah, just going back to the ego and how there's so many attachments to this, false overlay of reality and man-made law and all these false religions, whether it be real religion, religious priest class stuff, or forms of it like government or money, which is what Chris and I spoke about. And it's funny because no one ever spoke about, yeah, you need money to buy the big cars and this and that, but there's a lot of ego attachment and motivation driven towards this, false shadow part of the ego, right? And they want to flash all that stuff and, oh, wow, I got clout and this is what I'm about, which is not really their true core essence. Nothing wrong with making money, especially if it's going towards positive means. But yeah, we all got to eat and yada yada. But yeah, I guess that's all I have to say.
Beautiful. Thank you, Derek and Rick, Brandon, Jerry, and Jim. And what you were saying, Jim, that last thing that struck a chord in me was, I think it's less about what we are in a way, and more about what we're not, because of the fact of the context of the situation we're in, where the world is so focused on the false identifications. And that's really what's going on with most people. So I would say finding your true ego is carving off all that bullshit. I'm not my truck. I'm not how much money I make. I'm not what numbers on my shirt. I'm not the hat I'm wearing. I'm not a soldier. I'm not even a man. I'm just this conscious perception, and I'm learning. And like in one of my presentations, I had kind of two pictures next to each other, and one was like this lady who keeps putting more and more stuff on her back, more and more junk. And you could think of yourself like that's the way most people travel through life, is building who they are, their ego, from adding more things and trying to say, this is what I am, this is what I am. But I think it's more about carving it away till you're the beautiful statue. Imagine yourself like a statue where you're carving off the stuff that's not you, and you're learning day by day what doesn't work, what doesn't make you feel good about being you, and you're carving it down till you're just this beautiful essence of what's left. And so I think it's more about taking things away than it is about adding things. I don't know if that makes any sense. Cool. That's the way I'm gonna end it. I hope that makes sense. Much love for listeners and friends in our community and all the support. And yeah, we got Funnel 3 to look for in June, and there's a lot more good things happening here with the One Great Work Warrior. So keep tuned in, and thanks guys for showing up and being such warriors of truth, and putting ourselves through these processes. Thank you.
Peace out.
Oh.